Some people in my office did a lot of research to update a study that we have done for the last 3 years now in partnership with NPR. We've been working with NPR actually for about 4 years under the aegis of the Smart Audio Report to look at America's adoption and usage of smart speakers and voice assistant technology. And for the past 3 years now, we have done sort of a holiday estimate where we have gone into the field with a telephone survey, both landline and mobile, to get a sense of how many people got one of these devices for the first time, got an additional device under their Christmas tree, their menorah, their pagan present pole, if you're a Wiccan, wherever they get their gifts. And so we have done a holiday estimate for the last 3 years in conjunction with NPR. And currently, amongst Americans 18 plus, it's about a quarter of the country now owns one of these devices. So it's grown a lot in the last, we've really been tracking this since the beginning of 2017. And if you look at the trend of that growth, there was a considerable amount of growth between just January to December of 2017. And it continues to go up. And I don't think you would call this hockey stick growth over the past 3 years. It is continuing to go up. But the really impressive growth number is not just the percentage of Americans who own one, but the number of devices that they own. And I'm rarely surprised by numbers in my business. I was surprised that this one went up, honestly. I would have expected this to go down as more people get a device or their first device. But today, if you own a smart speaker, chances are you own 2.6. I'm not sure what a 0.6 device looks like. A small one. But you own 2.6 smart speakers, basically. And that's putting audio and it's putting computing into rooms of the house and environments where it previously did not exist, right? And so these are sort of new behaviors that Americans are learning, and they're putting more and more of these devices in their home. And so when you look at the percentage in penetration and also the number of devices that people own, you can see the number of smart speakers in households has grown by 135% in just 2 years. So more and more people are getting these devices. They're putting them in more and more rooms of the house. And the final stat that I'll share with you from our joint venture with NPR is about the use of voice assistant technology in general. It's not just about smart speakers, but it's about using voice assistant tech. And for the first time, over half of Americans say they've ever used some kind of voice command, whether that's Siri, Google Assistant, Alexa devices, Bixby, the whole gamut. 54% of US adults 18 to plus say they've ever done this. And amongst those who say they have done it, amongst that 54%, about a quarter say they do it every day. So these behaviors are becoming learned. These behaviors are becoming more and more mainstream. I do think that there's more room for growth in terms of the penetration of smart speakers in America. And I think the entire industry, I think, has to do a better job of making that case to mainstream America. But we continue to see increased growth. We continue to see more and more devices in the home. And smart speakers are, in fact, encouraging people to use voice assistant technology on their mobile phones and other devices as well, so that the smart speaker is teaching that behavior. And so I'll stop there. All of this is available at npr.org/smartaudio, and there's about 4 years worth of research there. But that's just a really quick taste of this. And now I think we're going to have a panel, I believe.
All right. Let's bring up our thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Let's give it up for Tom. All right, EB and our panelists, please come up. All right, we're going to talk about data, research. All right. So E.B. Moss is our moderator from Media Village. Let's give it up for E.B. Moss. She's going to introduce our panelists, and we're going to get this conversation going.
I feel so far away from you, and yet I feel so close to you. Come on down.
Come on down.
Take the middle, and that'll be good feng shui.
Okay, great.
We'll meet you in the middle.
All right, good.
You're good.
How's this sound? Everybody can hear me okay? Because this is about voice. I'm going to take just a couple seconds to introduce not only myself a little bit more so you know a little bit about Media Village, where I work for, but also about this illustrious panel. I head up content strategy for this content platform about media marketing and advertising. It is a free publication. MediaVillage.com. We also have a research division. But one of the big things that Media Village is all about is about education, because we have no time, right? We're all trying to learn as much as we can. So a big aspect of what we do is focus on educating the industry. So that's what I wanted this panel to be a little bit about. And I'll introduce each of them, but it's through the lens of making sure that we're not staying in the sort of echo chamber of tech talk, but really understanding the language and the use and the sentiment around voice and its very definitions. So in the first seat to my left is Brett Kinsella. And I'm going to turn to that page because we didn't plan where we were going to sit. Hold on. I've got my cheat sheets right here. And he's got a pretty fun description. And it's very straightforward on his LinkedIn page. So that's what I'm reading. He's all about voice and AI. He's the commentator of the year on voice and AI at the Alexa conference, top 15 in voice according to SoundHound, guest columnist in USA Today and one-time guest host for Talking Tech podcast, creator of VoiceBot.ai, the VoiceBot podcast, one of my favorites, and Voice Insider, and a frequent conference keynoter. Brett, I'm a big fan of the VoiceBot podcast, so anything that you say, I've probably already heard. I listened to all of them in the last 1 hour.
And we love that about you.
Thank you.
More of you could do that, by the way. VoiceBot podcast, come on.
Who doesn't know?
It's all about shilling.
Podcast?
That's right. And next in the middle is, and I practiced my verbal on this one, Dr. Joan Palmiter Bajorek. Okay. Say that 3 times fast. And she is the expert in things of saying things fast because she is named an Alexa Award finalist as Executive of the Year, a top voice influencer, and she earned her PhD in speech language technology. And she's been published in Harvard Business Review on voice tech, bias in AI, and multimodal interfaces. I understand most of that, but we're going to get into some of that tech talk in a second. And then my friend Tom Webster, who you just heard from, who always has interesting ways to present research. I hope, Tom, that you'll get into a little bit of the feral pig description. Inside joke, but hopefully he'll explain that about audiences
Well, I have
and
to now.
podcasting. You have to now.
I need an explanation.
He's the Senior Vice President, Strategy and Marketing at Edison Research, if you missed that. And he conducts market research and exit polling with strategic info for businesses and media organizations worldwide. And he has about 25 years in at this and really is one of the most compelling presenters of research I've ever seen. So, I want to start by tossing to Brett for a second. A la the echo chamber of tech talk, we heard from Scott at Google that voice is really about commands and things like that, using your voice to get things to do things, right? I come from the world of audio, radio, television, et cetera, and a lot of podcasting. And to me, I think of voice as a little bit more universal than that. Let's start in the spirit of education with being on the same page about how we define voice, the different perhaps buckets of what that contains beyond just engagement.
Okay, so let's break this down then. So one of the things we have is we have voice control, and that's not voice assistance. So we'll start with that you can actually do voice navigation of an existing app, for example, and people have seen that for years. And that is an area that's going to grow a lot. So I don't want people just to think this is an assistant world, because voice control of applications and these types of things, or voice navigation, is going to be a bigger thing going forward. And like everybody who's a brand in here should be thinking about that for their properties that require that digital interaction. And then when we get into voice assistance, we have multiple layers of that. So one of the things that Scott was talking about was this command and control with a voice assistant, where the assistant is like the helper in that command and control. So it's not just like walking through a programmatic interface. So that's a really important type of thing. And Google has been out in front of this around being focused on enabling you to be more efficient in what you do, so you spend less time. And so that's a really a really important thing that the assistants are allowing us to do. I was having a conversation with Brad Abrams last night from Google, and I think his comment is convenience wins. And that's definitely part of this activity. And then we have other things where we have utilities, right? So you can ask an assistant to do something for you, which might be like a conversion for ounces to grams or something like that. So there's all sorts of different types of utilities that don't necessarily have to be voice apps. And then we have media, which you're more familiar with, which is being able to do search of media, pull up media, maybe interact with media, but it tends to be more of this entertainment experience. A lot of times, sometimes it's interactive, sometimes it is you request, and then it's more of a broadcast experience. And then we have the other category, which could be lots of things. It could be games, it could be a brand engagement, those types of things. But that's generally how I think about it right now. And over time, I think that other category will form into multiple subcategories, but that's where we start.
And Joan, one thing that I left off is your big news of just a few weeks ago, and you're going to add some layers to what Brett said. You are literally all of 3 weeks in as heading up conversation research at Versa, an agency that's doing some very cool, innovative things with many areas that Brett described in voice. So with all of that vast 3 weeks of experience at Versa, you're still objective enough to tell us one of the coolest things that you've seen them generate. What are you so intrigued by right now?
What am I so intrigued by right now? Well, actually, as the head of conversational research, I'm doing internal, external facing research is one of my biggest mandates. And so I've been building out structures of what are the research questions we want to ask of our projects? Because Versa is a company based in Australia. I'd be shocked if most any of you knew about it, but we do really high quality experiences for companies like Huggies and Domino's, rugby teams, which is kind of the NFL of Australia. But we do really high quality projects for a client. And one of my concepts is I would love to look across our projects and understand what we're learning across different pieces to look at bigger puzzles and bigger pictures. So as a researcher, that's one of my look at the research questions. How are we defining what a good experience looks like, feels like? I think you've been in bad experiences. I want to also think about what good integrated multimodal experiences are. And one of the things that Versa, as they were courting me, actually, they came out and found me as a candidate. I'm multilingual and I care about the world. And so, for example, we've built our Domino's app is for Alexa. It's also for Actions. We've built it in English and German and French. So I think thinking about different builds, thinking about multi-layers, thinking about how the brand is talking to the customer, how it's a fun, potentially gamified experience. We heard about Frozen 2 earlier today. So I think a lot of, hopefully those are little pieces of the puzzle of what I'm thinking about as I step forward in my week 4 of work.
And congratulations.
Thank you so much.
And we are going to touch on brands because, again, that's a little bit more of my world, media and marketing. And I think that that's so important for us to walk a mile in the shoes of brand marketers as well and how they are uptaking this whole new space. So if, Joan, you are a little bit about the research of why and what's compelling about voice, Tom, you're sort of more about the what and the what's happening in the world. Is there more that you can embellish on given, last year's report versus this year's, and let's bring in a little bit of your podcasting expertise as well.
Yeah, actually, the Venn diagram of people who own smart speakers and people who listen to podcasts, those circles are fairly close together, but they don't listen to podcasts on their smart speakers very much. It turns out to be actually punches well under its weight, I think, because it's not easy yet. I still cannot. I have a podcast and I cannot get it on my smart speaker. I've asked loudly. I've spoken in very loud American and I've not been able to get it yet. So there's still, I think, a bit of a disconnect. But when you look at the activities that people typically do with these devices, it's a litany of the mundane, I like to call it. And if you look at not necessarily the top activities by day part, but the top indexing activities by day part, the things that sort of punch above their weight at different times of the day, It all makes a lot of sense. In the morning, it's news, traffic, and weather. In the course of the day, it's adding things to reminder lists and to-do lists. Between 5 and 7, it's either ordering food or getting a recipe. We're thinking with our stomachs, basically, at that period of time. And then at night, it's setting the lights, hearing an audiobook. So it all makes a lot of sense. And I think as we continue to innovate in this industry, we have to sort of innovate in the mundane. We have to innovate in the everyday utilities that people want to do in their lives that they don't necessarily think a whole lot about. And I know we can do a lot of cool things with voice, but it's actually the not cool things that people use these devices for most frequently.
Before we get a little bit more into, the what's in it for the brands aspect of it, I do want to pay homage to your partner in this research, NPR, and something that they've worked on actually with Spotify. And we hear a lot about the streaming wars now with OTT, but clearly we're in the same kind of war now with voice and audio. So one thing that came out recently was Spotify, which is blending music and spoken word with, which is for the first time with your daily drive. And I know that NPR has mentioned that having exposure on Spotify through that opportunity has driven younger listeners to the broadcast side of things, or even their digital platform as well. What do you think about the future of how we're going to grow our audiences in this kind of cross-platform way?
Well, I think a better case has to be made to the mainstream American public about what voice technology can do. We have seen growth. I've just shown you that growth. I would call it modest growth, right? I wouldn't call it spectacular growth. It certainly started off very, very rapidly, more rapid than smartphone adoption. But I think there still needs to be a case made to the American public about why they want this technology in the first place. And also to sort of teach them how to use it when they already have it. I mean, we all have it on our phones. And we know that smart speakers have taught people to use this technology. But, I have all of the devices because that's kind of my job. But I have a Google Pixel book, and it has the Google Assistant built in, and I never use it. I will sit there typing something, and I need to know the capital of the Ivory Coast, and I will Google it instead of asking. It's right there, right? So, and I'm a reasonably smart person. I just don't think of it. So I think there has to be a behavioral case made to the American public and to the world at large. But why would you even care about this technology?
Interesting. And there was a commercial that I saw for Buick, and the woman is speaking into her voice assistant, and she says, "Buick, warm up my car." And her partner says, "You can do that?" And the whole theme of the commercial is, "You can do that?" And I think that has to be the point that we need to take away, is how do we educate on, where does he get those wonderful toys? What are the cool things that we can do that we're not well communicating to consumers? Brett, how do we tackle that?
Well, I think Apple showed us the way when they launched the App Store. There's an app for that. And we need to be able to express that more clearly to consumers. I think right now, part of the challenge has been that there's not an app for that for everything. And so in voice is a little bit different. And if you're looking at a mobile app and you say, oh, there's an app for that, I can search. And if there's not, then I understand that there's not an app for that. With voice, you don't really know, right? Because it's harder to search. It's not a visual mechanism. But advertising like the Buick commercial will help. We want to see this to be more and more that when consumers go to a voice assistant, whether it's on the phone, in the car, on another device, a smart speaker, we want them to get a good answer. And that's, sometimes that's search, but a lot of times that needs to be an immersive voice experience. And I tell people who are brands in this room, here's the big problem for you if you're not supporting the space. There's a lot of people, as Tom has shown, and other people have shown, that have smart speakers in their home and they're asking them questions every day. There's a lot of people with it on the phone. And if they ask about your brand and you don't respond, you are silent, right? So then it's up to the voice assistant provider to say, oh, answer that question about you or about your category. And that, if you're a brand marketer, I think would be viewed as problematic. And so you need to be in the game so that you actually have the opportunity to serve consumers in this channel that's been growing. You need to actually be like Buick in this case and tell them that it's an opportunity. I tell people, no one's coming to save you from discoverability. And I really love the comment that Scott said, because a lot of people have not said this in the past. Discovery is not a solved problem. Of course, it's really not a solved problem on mobile app in the App Store. I think we know that as well. But it's great that Google, who knows more about discovery than anybody else in this market because of what they do, they're saying discovery on voice is not a solved problem. So be aware of that. And when we think about that, then you as the developers, the brands, you have an obligation to actually help with discovery of your own thing while the platforms figure out how they can support you as well.
Joan, I'm shilling again for myself now. So when I launched the podcast from Media Village called Insider Insights, we thought it would be cute to name it like website in SITE. That's a problem because now you have to be so cognizant of how you're developing your voice assistant and even the title of your podcast or whatever it is because of interpretation. Is this where your linguistics expertise comes in? What would you advise us?
Ooh, yes. Yeah. I'm a highly trained phonetician, and this is a different vein I could have gone in. We recently saw that Snips was acquired by Sonos, and I smiled because both of those companies, their names were influenced by linguists because of how easily, you want fricative. There are specific things that, as you're saying, in sight, if we're changing a few letters, visually, not a problem. I get the joke, I see something. If it's acoustically the same thing, you may not have that happen. And so I think a company like Snips, a very low frequency word, we've got two fricatives. They're clearly a linguist, a phonetician was paying attention. That company is extremely smart in the first place. They hire some phenomenal people. But I think we're gonna see more and more of choices, branding things. Different advertisements I see making strategic choices about how they name their products so it works well on voice. This is something we already see and we're gonna see way more of in the future. Some of those jokes I think will change and the kind of homonym space. Mm-hmm. Brett, you're nodding?
I agree.
You should try to agree with your linguist.
We're going to talk about audio branding later. Audrey's going to talk about that. I'm sure a bunch of other people will as well.
It's not new news.
Right, and this is one of the things, like naming is different. I've already confronted this many times over the last several years. Naming is different in this world where you are hearing as well as seeing. And so, Joan, I think you explained it perfectly.
I gotta change my name. Perfectly. It sounds like what I think is that no one can pronounce none of my names. So I'll just go by Joan, hopefully, although Joanne is.
You could be like Cher.
Well, it's something you do have to, I've done a number of not smart things in my life. And one of them was, I have a podcast with my wife called The Freenoter.
Was that one of the not smart things?
That the podcast.
No, that was one of the smart things.
The wife is a smart thing.
Yeah,
I believe in that one.
But I cannot get it on my Alexa device because it does not know the word Freenoter because I made it up, right? And so I cannot actually get the podcast on my smart speaker because of that. So it's a thing you have to think about.
There's some people in this room that can help you with that, by the way.
I'm sure, but
But you shouldn't have to, right? You shouldn't have to beg and say, please add us to the lexicon. We need support. I need a sophisticated NLU. No, you want to design it so it fits perfectly with where we're building in the ecosystem.
Right. Something that I thought was fascinating was how voice assistants can help reduce the friction to things like online shopping. And this is where I want to get into a little bit more of the verticals of different brands. I saw an announcement also from CES that ExxonMobil now has voice pay enabled for Alexa enabled cars. So there are issues and there are opportunities that help reduce that friction to purchase. And then, of course, with shopping, it makes it easier to just ask for something. Let's go down the line. Issue, opportunity, We've heard it before, but it bears repeating.
Mostly opportunity. So,
And what? What's the opportunity?
How many people here live in New Jersey?
Woo!
All right, shout out to New Jersey.
Shout out New
Garden
Jersey.
State.
Maybe you won't even have to roll down the window to get your gas now. So just fill it up, and then you ask Alexa and you drive off. I think I looked at that as another important announcement in this space, where what we're doing is we're reducing friction. So in that case, you still have to get out of the car. Maybe it's not perfect, but at least I'll tell you, when I go to a gas station, putting the card in, waiting, like having to go through, no, I don't want a car wash, all these other things. I mean, we've done this, zip code. It's kind of a pain in the butt. It's like something like 45 seconds before you can actually pump. And this might be something where you can actually do it right away. So I like that in particular, and I think a lot of people are overlooking it. But I like it even more is training people for thinking about conducting transactions while they're on the go. And a lot of that is what Tom really talked about, like the smart speakers as training devices. In the car, if you start to think about buying your gas or going through the drive-through, you place your order, and when you get up, they just hand you the bag. You've already paid for it because you've done it through the dash. That's another step in this process. And I'll tell you one other thing I think a lot of people forget about. We did a voice commerce report a year and a half ago, and what we said is you have to think about the buying process, and there's different elements of the buying process where voice might come in there. One of the key areas might be transaction at the end, but it doesn't have to be, because the front end of the buying process is one of the most friction-filled aspects. And that's because of voice search, because there's so many things out there. And we see this all the time when product catalogs, it takes a while to sort of type through, no matter what website you're on. And something you can speak in 4 seconds might take you much longer. And we see this actually in drive-throughs right now. Something that would take you, or not drive-thrus, but like self-service ones where you select in McDonald's, I've seen this, something that takes 50 seconds to enter input at McDonald's on a screen, you can do in 4 seconds by voice. And so we look at things like this, and a lot of it's just going to be that training, but I think there's tremendous upside. There's clearly problems if you can't see it, but we're talking about multimodal as well. But I don't even think we need to worry about multimodal. There's a lot of buying that's going to be going on just because of those use cases where it helps.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Joan, I know an area of interest for you is the health pharma space, and there are some voice assistants now that are HIPAA compliant. How do you think consumers, given the why of your research, are going to feel about safety and privacy and asking for something as personal as health support by voice?
Yeah, well, I think it really depends on the use case. If I could go back just a little bit and talk about training, because I think one of the things we're talking about is training the user, which, as someone who works in user experience, train the user? Okay, who has played a video game and actually gone through all the training modules they have for your video game? Right? Like, no one wants to be trained how to do the app or the thing. I think seeing cool examples, but you as a user, you want to be met where you're at. You want to be taken through a seamless experience where it feels safe, where it matches with what you're looking for. It is frictionless. Maybe it's a little new. You're like, ooh, that's possible? Okay. But I think if you're scared, that comes from a totally different place of not trusting. Do I trust the brand? Is it going to work? My money, my private data, my health stuff? The stakes get really high really fast. And I mean, it's nice that we're HIPAA compliant in some respects, but I think we're a ways off from where we could be meeting our users where they're at in sensitive use cases.
Well, and privacy is a huge issue. It really is. And when the last smart audio report that we did with NPR a few months ago, we looked at the reasons why people might not want to buy a smart speaker. And 3 of the top 6 are basically centered around privacy and security of data. But the really fascinating thing was that the percentage of owners of these devices who have those concerns is nearly identical to the percentage of non-owners of those devices that have those concerns. So for people that have not bought into this yet, privacy is a barrier to entry, period. But even for the people who do own them, privacy is a barrier to experimentation, I think. It's one thing to say, all right, I'll set a timer and I'll listen to the radio, but engaging in a financial transaction, Not even the owners of these devices are necessarily there yet. And of course, nothing's more horrifying from a privacy standpoint than the smartphones in all of our pockets. They're truly terrifying. Smart speakers are no worse than that. But it's absolutely a concern. And there is going to be a cap on this technology in terms of adoption, unless that concern can be dealt with adequately.
Well, and I think there's privacy in the big data realm, but there's also privacy, like if I went out in the hallway and was like, transaction declined, holy shit, what happened?
Yeah.
I don't need the world to hear that I got my transaction declined. Like these different levels of privacy I think we're thinking about, and making sure it fits the use case, right? That I'm just buying a hamburger, I don't eat meat, but if I were buying a milkshake, sure, I don't care how many people hear that. But I think fitting the use case, meeting the user where they're at.
Yeah.
And you and I have debated a lot about privacy. I don't know if you want to mention your feelings about what users say they do and then what they actually do. I think is a conversation we've had.
Yeah, it's sort of both, but right. Users say they care about privacy, but then I've seen the same thing. I've seen like the people who are most concerned about privacy are only 15% less likely to buy a smart speaker than the people that have no concern about it at all. That's not a big gulf between what they're saying and what they're doing, right? So in general, if the value proposition is strong enough, consumers don't care, right? Because this great arc towards convenience is something that drives them. And I actually think it's really rational on their part, because the chances of a problem are actually quite low. Maybe the severity of a problem is high, but the chances are low. And so people are making a trade-off until there's an issue, and then they'll adjust their behavior. And so I like that. But I really like what Tom said too. It's not just about adoption of the technology. It might be experimentation with the technology that is the issue. And maybe that's the bigger issue that we have right now, because you just presented more than half of the people have tried voice commands, 25% are using them somehow daily. So that's the number that I'm kind of more interested in. It's not like how many people have access to voice and have tried it, but how frequently are they doing it and how broadly are they doing it? So maybe they're not doing transactions. Maybe they're, we just did a report a couple months ago where we saw only 7.5% of consumers had done something related to healthcare with a voice assistant, right? And so that's really low. Now it's like for healthcare, it's like, a lot of room to grow.
Right.
Right. But I think that's, Tom, I really like the way you phrase that. I mean, that puts a fine point on it, that if we want broad adoption to all the different things that people in this room are trying to do, then that might be where privacy hurts more than just like overall adoption of being able to do music and timers and some of these other things where people obviously don't care.
Well, I got the 3-minute warning about 2.5 minutes ago. So in the spirit of CES and being in the roaring 20s now and all of the projections, I'm going to give you each, sorry, Pete, I'm going to give you each 30 seconds max. Not projections for 2020 with voice, projections for 2025. Ooh, pop quiz. Tom.
The next big, I think, obstacle in the way of voice technology or opportunity, I guess, is the car. And I think we're going to be talking to our cars a lot. Not this year, not next year, but I think 2025 is a good number for that.
I already do, but usually it's because it's my fault.
Well, we know, just really quickly, we did a study called the Commuter Code, where we mounted GoPro cameras into cars and aimed them at whatever their entertainment center was, right? And we know that people who are listening to digital content in their cars, they switch a lot less because it's dangerous to do so, because it's generally coming from your phone and you can and will die when you do that. But that's going to change media consumption in the car. That's going to change a lot of things, I think.
Joan?
Productivity.
And I do have to say, I apologize for this, but one thing that I want to mention is your Women in Tech founding Women in Voice, rather.
You think I'd leave the stage without mentioning?
I know, and diversity is such an important initiative for you. There's Bias in Voice. Media Village has our Advancing Diversity Honors tonight, so I just wanted to pay homage to that, but also give you your 23 seconds about 2025 projections.
I am the founder and director of Women in Voice. Gender diversity is super important to all of you for today and the future. So come join us at Women in Voice. We're active on LinkedIn, Twitter, huge international community that I happen to run in addition to my research. Productivity tools. I want to stop us writing emails. Accessibility, I think there should be so many different ways to interact with content. Multimodal, voice, gesture. The number of meetings I'm taking about AR and VR right now is wild. What was the other thing? Accessibility, productivity. I'm happy with those.
Diversity. Yeah.
Oh, and healthcare. We're talking about healthcare and wellness.
Right.
But I think wellness in a broader sense, the number of topics about mental health, digital detoxing, quality time as related to that productivity tool. If I never have to write another email in my life, I'd be thrilled. My mom would be thrilled. My aunt who has arthritis will be thrilled. By 2025, we'll see a lot of disruption in that.
Yeah, that was an interesting presentation at AARP also about voice with the elder community and ease of use
And
and
they have
arthritis.
tons-
Anyway, there's so much more we could talk about.
They have so much money to spend on it.
2025.
Please do it.
What are we
Okay.
looking at?
Brett Kinsella, ally of Women in Voice.
Whoop,
So you know that. I think the more interesting thing when we consider predictions is right now what the supply side is going to be doing. So I'm thinking about brands. We're at CES. There's a lot of brands here. This is one of those types of tracks. And so I would say by 2025, I'm expecting somewhere around 25% of the top, we'll say 500 brands globally will have their own voice assistant. They'll be working on Google, they'll be working on Amazon, they'll be working on Samsung, all these other places because those are channels for them and that's going to be important for them to reach out. But what I think Amazon and Google have proven is that it's really valuable to be able to have that voice assistant as well. We'll talk about this a little bit later, but this idea that you can have your own assistant and you can expand the experience that you offer to consumers is a big deal. And I think that's going to be, over the next couple of years,
The
a
BBC.
big trend, a big trend.
I agree.
And that, as we say in voice, has to be the last word.